You're listening to Storytime in Paris on Paris Underground Radio. Since well before Victor Hugo looked up at Notre Dame and thought, what if a hunchback lived in there? Authors have been inspired by Paris. The Storytime in Paris podcast will help keep this tradition alive with interviews and readings from your favorite contemporary authors with a French connection. Every episode features 5 questions asked by you, our author's biggest fans, and answered live on air. Then our authors will treat us to a reading of an excerpt from their book. Who knows? Maybe you'll even be inspired to write your own great French novel. I'm your host, Jennifer Garrity. My guest this week is 9-time author Jay Swanson, but you may know Jay best for his YouTube vlogs, which have reached over 7 million views worldwide. His latest book, Sea of the Unknown, is a departure from his usual science fiction and fantasy novels, and is a beautifully written memoir detailing the tumultuous path his life has taken to get him to his current life in Paris. It's a surprisingly intimate, introspective, and humorous look behind the scenes of a life lived in the public eye. Please join me in welcoming Jay Swanson, author of Sea of the Unknown. Hi, Jay. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Happy to be here.
Can you start by telling us a little bit about you and your work?
Yeah, I can. My name is Jay Swanson, as may be well known at this point, I guess. I am predominantly a YouTuber at this point. I was a daily vlogger for a really long time and am in the transition to spending a lot more time focusing on helping people get off on the right foot when they come to Paris, whether that's their first time here or their 17th time, trying to introduce people to new things, fun things, and the best sides of Paris so they have the best experience and avoid the worst elements of Paris that it might be known for sometimes. But then, I was a writer before that, wrote a lot of science fiction and fantasy. And then my latest book, which I think we're going to be talking about today, is a book about how I got here and the highs and lows along the journey towards being a professional creative.
Exactly. And so normally I would ask what your connection to France is, but your whole book is about your adventure to get here.
Yeah.
So I'll just ask you, what drew you to France in the first place, and does it meet your expectations now that you're living here?
Yeah, that's a great question. That I don't know is the answer. What was drawing me here? I always wanted to come here for some reason. So even when I was 11 years old and in my 6th grade art class, and they were like, we're going to start combining art with Spanish to get you a head start. And I was like, I don't want to learn Spanish. I want to learn French. Leave me alone. I want to draw. And so I knew from an early age, whether that was through the books that I was reading or, just the adventures of Tintin, who knows? I wanted to have adventures, but I was drawn to France. And when I first came here, the answer to the question was no, it did not meet my expectations because I lived in Nice. And Nice is nice, as everybody will jokingly, intentionally or unintentionally say at some point, but it's not what I was looking for. And it was good for my language. I got fluent and made French friends and whatever else. But it was when I finally made it to Paris for a couple of weeks, I was like, oh, this is what I wanted. This is what I always was looking for. And so then I made it a point to come back.
Yeah, it was the same for me. France, I love France, but Paris is magic.
Yeah, what is it about that? Do you know what it is about Paris that is magic for you?
I do know what it is for me. And actually, maybe it's similar for you. For me, I feel like it's a place where I am able to create without worry or fear or thinking about how it's like. I come from New York, and in New York, if you say you're an artist or a filmmaker or whatever, everyone wants to know what the end result is. Who do you know? How much money have you made? Have I seen your work? And here, if I say I'm making something, people just want to know what the project is.
Yeah.
So I get to kind of indulge in that creative, aura without having to worry about how it's going to all end up.
It's nice. Kind of, you get to actually experience and enjoy the process a little bit more.
That's what it is.
That's good. That's a good response. I actually feel similar. I came from the other side of the country. I grew up in a small town called Pullman, Washington, but I found myself in Spokane for a little bit, and everybody that I knew and met and so forth, there was not even necessarily an interest. They were just like, yeah, I'm making these YouTube videos, and like, oh, it was kind of like, who would want to watch anything you make? It was more the attitude, And so it's like, oh, okay. So it's always just kind of getting smashed by people. And when I came here, same thing. Like, I made so many friends so quickly that like, oh my gosh, this guy makes videos. Like, you should check him out. They didn't even know me yet. And they were just excited to be near me and a part of what I was doing. And it took a long time for me to adjust to understand and expect that almost. I always felt like I was a burden on other people for filming around them. I'd be like, I'm really sorry about this. And like, no, like it took me years to be like, hey, you want to hold the camera? And they'd be like, yeah, why wouldn't I hold the camera for you? And it's like, oh no, I've had to relearn so much. So I feel your pain.
I think there's also something about being like, here we're exotic. So if we're like, hey, I'm making something, people are like, ooh, who's this cool American who's making something?
No, it's cool. I mean, well, I think for me, that's the thing. I try to encourage people when they're coming to really put the effort in for the language just for that reason, actually, because I found that also if you're an American who speaks French, that at least in the past, maybe it's less of a novelty now, but for the last 10 years of my life, whenever I was the American in the room at like a house party or something, and they were like, he speaks French too, it was like, oh my gosh, he's not an idiot. And then they really wanted to talk to you. Yeah, it's very nice. It's very nice to separate yourself from the pack just by being who you are.
Yeah, that's a very nice way to put that. So I have collected some questions for you from your fans and your followers. The first question is though, from me, because it's my podcast.
I was going to say you have the right to cut in line.
Exactly. So you are a prolific vlogger. You vlogged every day for years. You posted a photo a day, every day on Instagram for over 11 years, which blows my mind. What is it like to live so much in the public eye, and does it create a false sense of intimacy?
In reverse order, yes. And I'm thinking about that a lot. I really liked it a lot at first because when I started vlogging daily, I was in a really desperate spot when I was in, and this is in the book actually. So this is, I guess, a little teaser for anybody who's thinking about reading it. But like, I felt very alone. I felt very adrift, and I was working really hard on projects that I was excited about that were, I had a startup that I was working on, and I was doing a bunch of side hustles and stuff. But I didn't have a real creative outlet, and I didn't have any connection with people who wanted to connect with me in a creative way, kind of like you're talking about New York. And similarly, what I was talking about in Spokane was just people had absolutely no interest in being a part of or helping, or just even an aligned sense of interest. And so when I started posting every day, what I was really lucky to do at first was I was able to connect with friends I already had that would watch and tell me how bad they were and how I should improve. And then steadily found this growing group of people around the world who were happy to talk a little bit, would leave some comments, and there became a dialogue between me every day in video and these people that would leave comments and respond and interact. And so in that way, it was really, really nice to share my everyday life, because I was tortured, and it was a small and intimate thing. And it was a lifeline to the outside world. And I really, really needed that, because I was in a really dark place and I was really, really struggling. And fast forward now, I mean, like when I was daily vlogging, I made almost 1,200 videos, which is too many. I don't recommend anybody do it ever, but it was cool. It was a really cool experience. I really, really liked it a lot, but it became a part of my identity. And the last few years I burned out really hard on it. And the last few years have been me trying to separate that identity out. And part of that is the parasocial relationship element of it, where there are a lot of people out there who really do feel like they know me that I don't know. And to be fair to them, they really do, because if they've followed me for that long, they really have a good sense of who I am. Like I think I'm very much the same person in private that I am in public. So you're going to get a good sense of who I am. That said, I do need to find a way of reclaiming some privacy, and I do need to find a way of setting up healthier boundaries there. And it's been a challenge for me, because that group of people has given me so much, and I care about them so much as a group. And I'm so grateful for them. The last thing I want is anybody to ever feel like I'm ungrateful or that I don't appreciate them. But I also need to find a good way of moving forward where I can share elements of my life, share elements of my work, and then maintain, some distance. So I think I'm figuring out a way to navigate that, but it's been a challenge. It's a good question.
Yeah, it's funny because I came to you through your book. So I had a friend recommend your book to me. So I read that first before. Now I've seen some of your videos, but your book is very candid and very intimate. And I feel like we're best friends, but you've never met me before. So how did you, like, in writing your book, how did you decide what to leave in, what to leave out? Where do you craft that line between the personal and the professional?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think the book for me was just so vlogging. There's a thing that OG fans will know, and I still use with my patrons as a term, but it's called a garage monologue, and that's what I used to do when I was living in my parents' house at 30. How old was I? 30 years old, 31, and and if I was miserable and I didn't really know what I would just go out and I'd set the camera up on top of one of their cars and I would just talk in the garage. And then I would go and I would sit down and edit it. And this is early on because I don't do this anymore. I haven't done this for so long, but I would edit it and I would listen to the way I was speaking and I'd be like, that is not, it wasn't even that I cared about how I was perceived so much as I would listen to myself and I'd be like, that is not how I want to see this problem. That is not how I want to engage with this. And so then I'd go back and I would do it again, and it wasn't a rehashing. It was me approaching the same problem but like with kind of a shifted perspective. And I would do that a couple times and it became this very therapeutic thing where like I got a real sense of like who I was as a character almost, and that helped me to reshape how I saw the world as a person, hopefully in a healthier way. And it's still something that I offer my patrons once a month, just as a way of like I'm just going to hash something out with you guys and think about it and let's see what happens. And so as far as the book goes, like I feel like what I was doing is I was writing a book for those people then who had followed along with the journey, but didn't really know a lot of the behind the scenes stuff that had led up to where I was at. And there are a lot of holes to fill and a lot. So it was very much like writing a book to a friend. The term that I used to use, I think it was like the amorphous blob. Like the people that watch my vlogs are like my amorphous blob who, when I turn on the camera, that's who I'm talking to through the lens. And there's this really wonderful exchange that happens because there is a back and forth that is obviously has its trickiness. But when writing the book, then I think I felt like I owed them some answers, that things that I'd never been brave enough to share, that in sharing, I knew I would also be better prepared and able to let go of myself. There's some things in there that I was worried that I'd be judged for. There's some things that like, there's a scene in a strip club for those of you that are curious about what kind of stuff I could be talking about. And I'm not the kind of guy that would have ever gone to a strip club. And that's part of that experience. And it's the kind of stuff that you share that you're like, oh my gosh, like what are people going to think of me when they see this, when they read this, when they hear it? And at the end of the day, ultimately, it's an expression of two things. One, I learned that by throwing myself into this amorphous blob repeatedly, that they were always there to catch me, like that there was more love came back than anything else. And that the other thing was that every time I did that, like it was because it was something that needed to be shared, whether for me personally, or there was somebody on the other side that needed to come along with me for that, for their own sake. And so I felt like the fears that I had in writing the book, especially the challenging stuff, were the exact same kind of fears that were a signal to me that like this is the right thing to do. And if there are people that don't like it and don't like me anymore afterwards, that's fine, because now they know me better as I really am. And I'd rather be surrounded by people, even in the personally, but also professionally in this amorphous blob. I want to be surrounded by people who want to be around me for who I am. And you can't lie to people and expect them to know who you are. So
that's true. It's interesting, the whole like therapeutic aspect of what you're talking about. It's interesting that doing something that's so public facing makes you so introspective.
Yeah.
It's almost counterintuitive.
Yeah. Well, I'm kind of an introspective person anyways. And I think that it's a curse and a blessing at the same time, I guess. But like it is interesting because it is that a lot of my OG followers, subscribers, whatever, well, also they know that it's like therapeutic for me. And sometimes I'll get these comments are like, I think you just need to talk this one out, something like that. And the cool thing is that it is like I think that's also what's drawn people. And we're undergoing changes. Like my channel is going to change a lot, I think, in the coming years. And it's time to move into some new spaces, but I'll always maintain some level of that, because I think what's interesting is that what I've seen, we're all human. We're all experiencing the same stuff in one way or another. We all struggle with different things, and but at the core, like the root level of what is important to us, and this is what's important as storytellers as well, is to recognize that what ultimately the carnal needs of every human are the same: to eat, sleep, have shelter, have sex, take a dump. Like everything you have is the same. And if anything's threatening your survival, if anything's threatening your romance, any of those things, that's what generates the most raw and connective story material that is also the most universal. And you'll never be able to tell a truly universal story, I guess, and you'll never be able to connect with everybody. But if you can share that, if you can dig into that, then I think you're going to find a deeper level of connection than if you don't. And the question is, how willing are you to share that, and how deeply? And for me, I was very willing to go very far and very deep. And I don't regret that at all, because I think that it was good and honest. And I hope that there's nothing that I've put out there ever that I would be more than just a little embarrassed about. Obviously, I'm going to be embarrassed about a lot, because hopefully I've grown a lot. But ultimately, yeah, man, I think it's a question everybody has to answer, and maybe it's a seasonal thing too.
Curious about what's going on in Paris right now? My second podcast, Don't Miss This, takes you beyond the typical and the obvious with a weekly roundup of the best of what's happening in Paris each week. Never wonder what you're missing out on again. Listen now to Don't Miss This on parisundergroundradio.com or wherever you listen to podcasts. We'll be right back with Storytime in Paris after a word from our sponsors. And now, back to Storytime in Paris. So, correct me if I'm wrong, but you've written 9 books, is that right?
Yeah, good research there. Yeah,
thank you so much. I can count to 9.
9, yeah, good job. I've published 9. I've written probably 11, but actually we have 12. Yeah, but I've published 9. My plan was I wanted to write and publish a book every year for 10 years, and then I got to the end of like this last book, and I was like, what am I doing? Like this is good. I love writing, but I was like, I need to focus on YouTube for now. And so I was like, okay, writing goes on the back burner.
So 8 of these books, by my research, are sci-fi or fantasy.
Yeah.
So how do you think that your familiarity with that genre helped or hindered your writing of Sea of the Unknown?
Well, I hope it sounds like you enjoyed the book, so that's good. And
I did.
I think the allegory, the underlying allegory of the Sea of the Unknown is one of the things that really tied in from my love of fantasy and of being able to leave the bounds of our world behind for a second. And so being able to talk about looking out on this allegorical or metaphorical, however you want to put it, sea of the unknown that stands between you and what it is that you want the most. And you don't know how you're going to get across it. It feels insurmountable. It feels like something that you could never possibly cross. And yet, you have to. And I feel like that's how very many of us, especially people that find themselves overseas, a lot of us, literally overseas, but that's how a lot of us really feel about life is there's this thing I want. I don't know how to get there, but I'm going to do whatever I can to get there. And it was I had another metaphor that I wanted to use of walking a trail in the wilderness that I thought was very good, but not quite as useful. And also because I lived on a ship for 4 years, this made the most sense. So I think that's probably the biggest way, was just being able to tap back into that and tell a little bit of a fantastical story as in the form of like an allegory underneath that helps to tie in the narrative of my life, which is important. We all, as humans, that's what we're craving most, right? Is to stick our lives into a narrative we can understand. So it was helpful for me too.
That's true. Well, and it's a beautiful allegory, and you do a really good job of weaving it throughout the book without it seeming like heavy-handed or repetitive or
Thank you.
Anything like that. You're a beautiful writer. I'll
Thank
say
you.
that too.
Very nice.
So you've been through some pretty intense and harrowing experiences in your life.
Yeah.
And it seems like you are always able to find the time and the energy to write. Can you talk a little bit about your writing process?
Basically, I think the most important thing was to set deadlines for myself. And when I started writing and publishing, I had fanciful ideas of what it would be like. I thought, oh, riches and fame await, which is not the case for any writer, really. But then I also decided to self-publish because that was about the time that KDP really kicked off with Amazon's Kindle Direct Publishing. And I managed to meet a few authors who were just killing it. They were putting out a book every once in a while and just slaying. And they were like, forget getting an agent, forget all this stuff, just start putting it out there, go, go, go. And of course, I'm not a perfectionist, but I definitely hold myself to a high standard for production as much as I can. And so I put a lot of time and effort into my first book, and I did manage to sell a fair number. The book is terrible, by the way, but like I did manage to sell a decent number. And then there were giveaways that gave away tens of thousands of copies, and it was really cool. And I was like, yeah, this is for me. Like, I'm definitely going to do this. Like, it's only up from here. And then every book I released after did worse than the one before it, because that wave just kind of came to a crashing close and everything was over. But then by then I really, really loved the whole process. And so the publishing process is something that I find very fulfilling, to go through all the edits and your revisions and to package it, to get the marketing materials put together. There's just a lot that I enjoy. There's some I hate too, but I really like it. So having that annual deadline of like, I have to publish something this year was a really good driving factor. And then I just always, writing for me was just, it's a craving. And like the act of creation is something that I enjoy no matter what. And it just happened to be the most consistent. I don't know why it was such a consistent thing for me, but like anytime, maybe it's because it was just also time by myself where I feel like I'm an extroverted introvert or something, but like I would just be like, I'm a people person. So people, and I do get a lot of energy from people, but I love having time sitting by myself on a computer, listening to music, writing. And so it was also kind of like a Zen time for me. And the nice thing about writing is that you see your progress every day. So you look at your word count and you're like, yeah, I knocked out 2,000 words today, or I knocked out 5,000 words today. And you can get just insane word counts up that like feed me in a way there. I'll just sit there all day. And so, yeah, I think it's just, I'm a bit of a stubborn and disciplined person. Like with the daily vlogging, the daily photo, like writing whenever I can is something that I think I took some pride in and just made space for and had to do because I was not always terrible, but I wasn't very good. And it just takes a lot of effort. And now I feel like I'm ready to write my first book. So
Interesting. When you're writing, do you know how your stories are going to end?
Yeah, I always start from the ending.
Oh, really?
I always start from the ending. So for me, that not always, but so I have a handful of stories in my head that I cannot wait to write. That I'm trying to think if any of them start from the middle though, because I feel like there's one that I've written, one of the books that's not published. The website is up. If you ever want to go to agnarsbox.com, there's a website. You'll be very disappointed to find out that it's not coming out anytime soon. But Agnar's Box started with a scene in my head that was inspired. Usually I'm inspired by music, but it was inspired by this clip that I remembered seeing somewhere. Maybe it was when I was living on the ship, and it was a really creepy, spooky clip. And I won't say it because this isn't a spooky podcast, and it's genuinely really creepy. But I saw this creepy clip, and it was like I was trying. There's no reason why when you see this thing, like you don't understand why, and the fact that there's no why behind it stuck with me. And then I created a why, and then that why for me found itself into the universe where it all happens in the same universe. My sci-fi fantasy stuff's all in the same universe. And then backwards and forwards, a story blooms. And it's very important to me then to figure out what the ending is, because you have to know that before you can even start it, and then go back and write it. And I wrote it. My buddy Jeff, one of my best friends, who loves all my books, thankfully. So he's not an unbiased source, but it's his favorite so far. He's gotten to read it. And I can't wait. God, I want to write so bad. So anyways, that's for the rest of them. It's always like there are scenes that get inspired here and there by music and so forth, but I almost always, and then they find a home eventually, but the whole story only really actually comes together once I know what the ending is, and like ending and even post credits where you're like, what is the emotional impact that I want this to have had? Who is there? And then how did they get there? And then you work yourself back. And you can go all the way back in time as far as like the pre-story goes, but at some point you have to find where does this actually begin, and then you go from there. And I love that process so much.
That's so interesting. I'm exactly the opposite.
Really? You start from the beginning?
I start
see where it goes.
Yeah, I start with a question and then try to work out what the answer is throughout the course of whatever it is I'm writing.
Yeah.
And I start with an image, not with music.
There you go. Like image, like a pictorial image, or
I start with an image in my head of like, so I'm a screenwriter. So I start with like usually an interaction or a piece of dialogue or like just something that happens. And then I figure out like, what is this?
Yeah. Interior, exterior. You got to get that figured out first. That's great.
Yeah. Yeah. So in writing about the experiences that I alluded to before with your harrowing times, especially with the Mercy ships, when you were going back and writing about your life, and especially those times, did writing about them change the way that you felt about them or about yourself?
Yeah, I think that goes back to like the therapeutic nature of engaging with it. And it helped me it was actually a really good cap on my experience in vlogging, because I mean, even though I wasn't really done daily, did I start writing? I think I was writing that book while I was still daily vlogging. I don't remember the timeline on that, but the two things that happened through both of them, and it was kind of a continuation of the same experience, because vlogging inhabits the same space in my brain as writing. And that's why I can't do both together. And I had to pick one, because I was doing both and it was exhausting. one of the biggest things, like I said earlier, was that I started to actually see myself as a character in my work. So I treated it, I was like, well, what do you need to know? What am I going to communicate to my audience? Especially the second season of my vlog, I realized I have to do a better job of this. And you need to know what a character wants and what a character needs to be able to identify and understand and sympathize with, even if you don't identify with them, a character. And character always knows what they want, but they don't know what they need. The audience intuits that. And so I was like, I need to do a better job of explaining what it is I want, which is terrifying. So I started sharing like goal boards, dreams, like what are my dreams? Where do I want to go? And then over time, my audience definitely picks up on what at least they think I need. And they're pretty intuitive. They get it. They know. And that's really, really important. And the cool thing is that in doing that process and spending a lot of time watching myself, listening to myself, like editing and reflecting on my day every single day and beyond, was that I started to have a lot more sympathy for myself. And I started to see myself as an imperfect, broken person that's, broken, but that somebody that, is deserving of love and is deserving of being cared for. And it helped me to really soften and to see myself in a more graceful or gracious way. And so by the time I wrote this book, I finally came around to actually looking at myself, not like in disappointment or harshly or anything, but looking at myself, like, it's all right, man. Like, you're doing the best you can. You're going to get it on the next time around, And so I had a much better view of myself by the time it all came to a close. And it's just been a part of the process. And I'll keep learning and growing the rest of my life, but it was definitely very helpful.
So interesting. All right, I have a bonus question for you.
Bonus.
If I could offer you an all expense paid trip anywhere in the world, but you have to go there for a year and vlog every day, would you do it? Where would you go and why?
What kind of expenses are you covering?
Everything.
Anything? Well, I mean, at this point, I would not go back to vlogging daily for a year. Because
that was in the question for a reason.
I would like to someday. Let's say I will. So let's say I would, because someday, I mean, there's a part of me that would totally do that. That part of me is an idiot, and he should probably be chucked off a cliff. But there's a part of me that would totally do that. I think Japan. I feel like I know so little. I mean, I know the briefest amount, right, that we get imported culturally, but I feel like there's like Tokyo is the largest city on Earth, the biggest mega city on the planet. There's so much to discover: food, landscapes, people, practices, cultures, fascinating things, questions. Like, there would be a new thing to discover literally every day that I was there, and I wouldn't run out of stuff to do. I would definitely I'd get centered in Tokyo, and then I would explore Japan. I could totally spend a year doing that, because I feel like there are places that I would rather live right now. I don't think I would up and live in, but if I was going to go and daily vlog it and share the experience of learning a place, I think Tokyo would be it.
It's a great answer.
Thanks.
That's
a good question.
I can't fund your trip. I'm so sorry.
I was going to say, where's the check?
So sorry. It was just theoretical.
Dang it.
So I think you're going to share a clip from Sea of the Unknown with us. Is there anything that we need to know contextually?
Well, speaking of, I mean, we didn't really cover that part, but this is a fun one. It's a fun chapter that dives into the kind of the beginnings of the end, a little bit of the detritus, the aftermath of my very prudish, waspy upbringing, and the romantic struggles that are very hilarious. I hope they're hilarious. I don't know. The painful. You get it. It's gonna be there's romance in snippets. And it's a fun segment.
From the Canaries with love. The Canary Islands. Assuming you don't get swept away by hordes of drunken Englishmen, it's hard not to have a good time. Although, to be fair, I'd argue you haven't been to the Canaries unless you've fallen in love in the Canaries. Which means I've barely been to the Canaries, but I've been nonetheless. I tried falling in love in the Canaries on 3 separate occasions and failed twice. Although I feel like the attempts were worth the failing. Attempt number 1, Euro Cup final win. You know those days where you keep crossing paths with the same beautiful person and you start to wonder, is this the real life? Is this just fantasy? Caught in a landslide, no escape from... Sorry. But you know that feeling. This instance involved a Swedish woman with whom I first crossed paths at Burger King in Tenerife. Not the most romantic start, but hey, it's where we were. I need to take a moment to thank the ship's head chef for this because he had worked pretty hard over the span of our voyage up from Lome, Togo, to convince me that a Whopper was actually a decent burger. I took up his challenge on the day of the Euro Cup final and made my way into town ahead of my friends, who were fine living the Whopper-free lifestyle they had constructed for themselves over the previous year. She was in line ahead of me with a group of friends, and in one of those moments you wish weren't so memorable for being so rare, caught my eye and held it. Sparks passing in a glance like that can give a person an instantaneous overabundance of confidence. She had a stick of face paint prearranged in the shape of the Spanish flag, and I asked her to paint one on my face for the match. We would continue to cross paths for the rest of the day. She even rushed over after a goal and gave me a peck on the cheek. I'm kicking myself as I read this because I was still deeply inhibited by a lifetime of conservative shame, not to mention the friends who were watching the match with me. How inhibited, you might be asking? Well, the Spanish win. We all make our way down to the waterfront where there's a fountain surrounded by a massive pool. The Swedish woman strips to her underwear, hands me her clothes, and prances back into the water with a look that still makes me dizzy 7 years later. And you know what I did? I handed her clothes to her friend and went home. Because that's what you do when you live on a vessel of judgment, mischaracterized as the love boat. I was too scared to jump in the water with her, especially in front of a bunch of other mercy shippers. And now you know the story of why I don't live in Stockholm today. I need to go for a walk.
Are you intimidated by French lingerie, or do you see it as a form of self-expression? Either way, you'll be interested in the Paris Undressed podcast. In each episode, host Kate Kemp-Griffin features interviews with lingerie designers, consumers, and experts to go beyond the seams of the lingerie capital of the world. Listen now to Paris Undressed on Paris Underground Radio or wherever you listen to podcasts. We'll be right back with Storytime in Paris after a word from our sponsors. And now, back to Storytime in Paris. So in Sea of the Unknown, you make reference to things that you say you're leaving for another book. Do you have any other book plans in the works?
I've been thinking, yes and no. I think it's hard because there have been so many changes in the last year, and like I've made so many course corrections, and I'm trying to be really good about that. Like, hey, I need to go the direction that seems the best. Let's just drop this and move on, which is hard for me to do, but I'm learning. I do think that I could write another book, and I think it would be very much about the things that scare me the most right now, which are talking more about the institutions that have failed me, and I think have failed us universally at this point. Like, I think our generation in particular is really struggling because all the institutions that we were raised to believe in are either crumbling or showing another face. There's a lot of hypocrisy and there's a lot of disappointment, and I think that that's the thing that I would work through right now, and I would try to figure out, because yeah, I think that's the most valuable contribution that I can make, both to myself and also to kind of share in the journey with other people. I don't feel like I mean, I have a lot. I'm not going to say that I don't have anything to teach, because obviously I have a lot that I could share, but I don't feel like I'm in a place in my life. Maybe you never feel that way, but I don't feel like I'm in a place where I'd be like, this is the way it is. But I think that I would definitely like to do another dive into, like, this was my experience, and this is why I think that it hurt me the way it did, and how I think I move forward and build something new for myself that satisfies the needs that this should have done and never could.
I would read that.
Cool. I'll open up Microsoft Word and I'll get started right away.
Fabulous. Thank me in the credits.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any plans to re-release your other books?
Yeah, I saw that one come through. Yes, no. So we did a podcast on this, actually. My buddy Richard and I, who's my editor for my last book. If you enjoyed Sea of the Unknown, Richard has a lot to do with that. He's a phenomenal editor. His dream is to be my editor and like narrative assistant. One of his dreams. I'm not going to say that's his only dream. He has other bigger dreams. But one of his dream jobs, thankfully, would be to help me with that. The goal is, the reason, like I said, so those 8 books are all within a narrative structure that has something like 50 to 60 books in it, because the whole thing spans multiple epochs and eras within the same universe, mostly focused on one planet. And I want to write them all, and they're all like, some of them are single books, some of them are trilogies, some of them are series. The goal is that you could pick any of them up, enjoy them on their own, and that would be it. Or you could do all of them and get a bigger kick out of it, hopefully. but like I said, I've eaten a lot of humble pie, and I've realized that I have a lot of work to do, and that the books themselves need reworking, and that we need to take a step back. So my hope is that in the next 5 years, I don't know if I've talked about this publicly or not, so this is a scoop for you, I guess, but my goal would be that I get to a place where I can afford to take a step back from everything else and focus on that, and spend a couple years fleshing out, building the skeleton of all of that, really building the skeleton, really getting a lot of the nuts and bolts in place, making sure that all the narrative arcs are there and that everything looks good. And then bring in some conceptual artists, a musical composer, and maybe another writer, Richard, obviously. And then spend some time really massaging and working that together, where we build out that universe in a way that I will be a virtuous cycle where I'll be inspired by the work we're doing collectively. I'll go back and rework and rewrite and blah, blah, blah. Spend a lot of time invested in that. And then, pick one of them in particular to really flesh out, work on, and then build a plan and go from there. It's pretty ambitious, but it's like, what got me into writing was filmmaking. I don't know what it looks like in the future, but I would like to like Mad Max a video. I'd like to spend the time to actually storyboard an entire movie out, flesh that out, get it done, and then pick that as our pilot or our movie, and do everything we can to get that made. And then that would be the track forward. So the answer is yes. There's a loose plan to republish them, but it is at the far end of a lot of other plans that have to come together first. And that's, yeah, maybe not. I don't know. We'll find out.
So what's next for you outside of books?
Outside of books, I mean, right now I just soft launched to my patrons Paris in My Pocket. I don't know if you saw that. I've linked to it here and there. But the main thing right now is kind of pivoting more of my YouTube to helping people get off on the right foot when they come to Paris. So my most popular videos on YouTube are ones that are like how to use the metro, how to visit the Louvre, that kind of stuff. And it's an area that I've kind of avoided because I never wanted to be the Paris guy, and because I love the city. And so I made those videos to help other people love the city, because I heard people saying like, oh, the Paris metro is so confusing, I hate it, blah, blah. And I was like, it's not confusing. Like, okay, I got to make a thing to help. And I was like, if people just have the right information to get off on the right foot, there are going to be so many fewer people in the world that think Paris sucks. If they notice a bonjour right when they walk in the door, they're going to have a much better time. Stuff like that. So like, if I can just make that information more readily available, then more people will love the city that I love. That's what started me off there. And I've come back full circle to that, where I'm like, that is actually something I really still care about. And I really want people to have a chance to really love the city the way that I do. So I'm going to repackage that in a way that does feel more touristy, does feel more Paris-y. Paris's top specialty coffee roasters, Paris top brunch spots, Paris, whatever, because there's a hole on YouTube for that. I really feel like there's a hole I can fill for people searching. But my real goal is to really, I don't know, like it does get me excited. Like I really want people to love the city, and I feel like it does not always get a fair shake. So yeah, that's not writing really. I mean, there's some writing involved, but I'm just going to dive headfirst into that and see if I can't do something fun and new and exciting. Yeah.
Fabulous. And where can people find you if they want to keep up to date with everything that's going on in your world?
I mean, the best place to find me is always going to be YouTube. Just look up my name, Jay Swanson. I've been posting a video every week on there for a long time, and we'll be posting there for forever. And yeah, just look me up, Jay Swanson, anywhere you go, or you can check out parisinmypocket.com and see what's going on there. It is still in soft launch, so there's a chance that it's not the best, but it'll get better with time. And yeah, check me out there, I guess.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I feel like I could just keep talking to you forever, but
thanks. It was great. I could keep talking forever. You got to be careful.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you again to Jay Swanson for such a compelling conversation. You can find Jay at jayswanson.me and on his new website, parisinmypocket.com. Please join me next week when my guest will be New York Times bestselling author Allison Pataki. Check back next week to see if your questions have been answered and to hear a reading from her book, The Magnificent Lives of Marjorie Post. Thank you for listening to Storytime in Paris. If you liked this episode, please consider leaving a rating or review and subscribe so you never miss another episode. I'm your host, Jennifer Garrity, and you can find me on all socials at Jennyphoria. That's JennyPhoria, and on my website, jennyphoria.com. Storytime in Paris is produced by me as part of the Paris Underground Radio Podcast Network. To check out interviews with previous guests, or to discover more great Paris-based podcasts, please visit parisundergroundradio.com. This episode of Storytime in Paris was produced by Jennifer Garrity for Paris Underground Radio. For more on this show and shows like it, please visit parisundergroundradio.com.